Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's my privilege to see that we're joined by many titans of the antitrust bar and our extended friends, as well as my good friend and I think the person responsible for Frank's and his brother's many successes, Bert Foer, who we became friends probably over 20 years ago when I was trying to do some damage through the legislative process to the merger thresholds, and all of a sudden somebody came knocking and saying, hey, be careful what you guys are doing to the second review process and raising the thresholds from 15 to 50. And the AAI was born. I'd never heard of them, or Bert. And since then, and through my last tour here, we became friends, and somebody who I respect for his not only wisdom, but the insight to the civil public discourse on antitrust policy, whether we agree with the ultimate goal or not. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to provide a little update on our Jackson Nash Address series. You guys may recall we launched those this past year. The Address series features the work of world-renowned economists whose work is at the cutting edge of theory and empirical analysis. Its goal is to help fuel innovative thinking in the broader antitrust law and economics communities while celebrating the importance of vigorous antitrust enforcement in protecting free market competition. While the theories of Professor John Nash and the antitrust enforcement approach of the great Justice Robert Jackson may be misunderstood in some courthouses, their spirit is still alive and well at the Antitrust Division. I'm pleased to announce that on September 20th of this year, we will hold the next Jackson Nash address, which will be delivered by Nobel laureate George Akerlof. And Professor Akerlof's famous article, The Market for Lemons, about the used car market, helped revolutionize the economics of information and uncertainty. Preceding the address, we will hear remarks it'll be a real treat, from Professor John Barrett of St. John's University School of Law, and he wrote the biography of Justice Robert Jackson, and I hope all of you will be able to join us in September. Today's speech is in that same spirit as the Jackson Nash Address, and I believe it warranted its own special event. We're honored to be joined by the renowned journalist and author Frank Foer. Frank writes for The Atlantic and formerly served as an editor of The New Republic. He also has written for Slate and New York Magazine. His research and writing interests are far-reaching, yet they're always deeply perceptive. In his book, How Soccer Explains the World, Frank explored how the forces of globalization shape the modern world using soccer, a sport loved worldwide, as a unifying device for explaining how economies have evolved over time. Most recently, Frank has turned his attention to a topic that concerns every one of us each day: the role of digitization in the global economy and its impact on competition. Last year, Frank published World Without Mind, in which he lays out what he perceives to be the existential threat of big tech. Frank diagnoses what he perceives to be the threat of knowledge monopolies, and he emphasizes the role of data as the, quote, new oil for the modern economy, both powerful reminders of the high stakes of innovation and technological change. If you haven't read the book, I strongly suggest that you do so, as long as Nina Hale allows me to say that. It's a great book. If our day-to-day work as enforcers of the Antitrust Division, we typically focus on the transaction in front of us or the conduct under investigation, and it can be tempting to lose sight of the broader trends at stake in the arc of technological change and innovation. Frank's work is a useful reminder that we should not miss the forest for the trees. Each decision to enforce the antitrust laws or not can profoundly impact the evolution of a market or even an entire industry. History will be the judge of whether antitrust enforcement decisions were right or wrong. And ultimately, history will be the final arbiter of whether courts rule correctly on those challenges. Frank, I hope your speech today can help expand and challenge our thinking as antitrust lawyers, economists, and enforcers. I haven't been told what you plan to cover, but if your written work is in any way indication, I know that we're in for a real treat this afternoon. I'm looking forward to it. It's an important area. It's something that we should all be thinking about. I know the media writes a lot about big tech and FANG and all of that, but I'm looking forward to learning more from you today. Please join me in welcoming Frank to the Great Hall.
So indeed, I come to you by way of a very peculiar claim to expertise. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an economist. I've never been schooled in antitrust, but I did indeed grow up in an antitrust household. Some of you in the audience look like you might be mothers and fathers, and you perhaps know the sort of moral framework that antitrust provides for parenting. When I would, for instance, complain about the unfairness of a low allowance, my father wouldn't yield until I established that he was guilty of an abuse of monopsony power. When my brother bullied me, I was forced to justify my complaint in terms of the damage to my consumer welfare, which of course meant nothing was ever done about it. So thank you, Macon, for inviting me here. I could win a Pulitzer Prize, but I don't think it would mean as much to my father as having me appear in this great hall with this audience. As I said, I'm not an economist, I'm not a lawyer, but from the perspective of a citizen, I want to thank Macon, and not just for the honor of appearing before you today. Taking on a big case like the AT&T Time Warner one is an invitation for abuse. You're up against powerful enemies who exhume dark clouds of obfuscation. And in our current political climate, there's a tendency to view every act of the administration as nefarious. But in one liberal's opinion, you've been very brave and very bold, and I think history will remember you well for taking a stand against the dangerous concentration of power in our public sphere. Global democracy is under threat in all directions, but our resilience, our ability to withstand the assault will depend on the vitality and diversity of the public sphere. There were many years, many decades, when the rest of the world treated antitrust as an esoteric discipline. Heck, based on the convoluted writing of much of the writing on antitrust, there were many years when antitrust treated itself as an esoteric discipline. But the question of concentration of market power is moving back to the center of American political discourse, the very place it resided for most of our history. Business is supposed to be the great force of innovation, government the lead-footed enemy. But if I read your speeches right, Macon, I detect an exhilarating spirit of innovation. We're at a moment when the doctrine and jurisprudence of antitrust aren't quite up to the problems posed by the Leviathan companies of our time. So I'm grateful that you've created a spirit of intellectual openness and that you seem to want to foster a spirit of creativity and that you seem open to the possibility of fresh theory. Let me assure you, I'm not going to supply you with that fresh theory. But I want to talk to you about the problems posed by the big tech companies. There's so much hanging in the balance when we talk about their size and dominance, and there's therefore so much resting in your hands. This is not a statement of hyperbole. The future of the human species could depend on how we think through the questions of monopoly as it applies to big tech. It could hinge on your work. So I want to start by talking about your phone. Because if you're like me and you want to get a good night's sleep, you have to put your phone 3 floors below you in the basement. If not, there's that moment where you reach for your bedside table and you find yourself clutching for your phone and you grab it and you get stuck in the middle of a zombie scroll. Your circadian rhythms are completely disrupted. And when you wake up the next morning, you have absolutely no idea what you were doing in the middle of the night. And that is not an accident. These devices, these platforms, have been reversed engineered to addict us. These companies have amassed incredible amounts of data. They know the insides of our heads. They've created this cartography of our minds. They know the things that give us pleasure. They know the things that excite us. And they've created their devices to exploit those human weaknesses in order to commandeer as much of our attention as possible. These companies have become everything companies. We know that Google started off with the humble mission of wanting to organize the world's knowledge, and that's expanded. Now Google is a company that does email, that does self-driving cars, that powers the cloud, that is a life sciences company that wants to defeat that problem known as death. Amazon started off as a bookstore, then it became the everything store, and that mission was not big enough for it, and so it's become a movie studio. It owns the Washington Post, it owns Whole Foods, it runs the computer servers that power much of the federal government. It's become a massive federal contractor. These are companies that are everything companies. They aspire to implant themselves deeply into our lives and to be with us over the course of our daily existences. The arms race right now in Silicon Valley is to become our personal assistants. They indeed want their artificial intelligences to wake us up in the morning and to be engaged in a course of conversation with us over the day. That's the little disk that Amazon wants to put in your house and Google wants to put in your house. And they want to be the epicenters for our entertainment, for our consumption. And in the course of doing that, they want to be able to shape the decisions that we make over the course of our day. They take this intimate portrait of the inside of our head, they take this data, they take this understanding of our psyche, of our weaknesses, and they intend to exploit that, to monetize that. And because of their dominance, they've just amassed incredible power over markets, over public conversation, over democracy, and like I said at the beginning, over our future as a species. When I was writing this book, I spent a lot of time on YouTube watching the founders of these companies talk. When the tech press covers these companies, they tend to focus on the earnings call last night or on the latest product release. And what they don't focus on is the fact that the founders of these companies say profoundly interesting and important things about human beings, about human nature, about our social ability. And there's this stock caricature that we have for talking about Silicon Valley. And when we think about Silicon Valley, we think of them as a bunch of Ayn Rand-loving libertarians. And indeed, there is something to that portrait. They don't like regulation very much. But when you listen to them talk about human nature, the thing that is so striking is that their view of humanity is essentially a collective one. They don't think of us as a bunch of heroic individuals who have potential to fulfill. They think of us as a collective, and you see it in the way that they talk about the world, that they talk about everything is social, it's crowdsourced, it's networked, that they fetishize the mass, they fetishize collaboration, and that's the reason why they have such incredible insensitivity to the individual and to individuality. And it's the reason that they've rolled privacy, that they've been so hostile to arguments about authorship. It's the reason why they believe that monopoly is the platonic state of capitalism, and that they don't understand the imperatives of competition. These companies, because of their dominance, are able to take their values and impose them on the rest of us. We may not see it all the time, but because of our dependence on these machines, on these companies, their values end up becoming our values. Now, as human beings, technology is one of the things that defines us as a species, our ability to affect our environment. And we've always been merging with machines. The hammer is an extension of the arm. The factory is the automation of upper body strength. But these machines are intellectual machines. And the merger that's happening with these machines and these platforms is the merger of our minds with their machines. And of course, we're not just merging with machines in the abstract, we're merging with the companies that operate those machines. And we're on a trajectory. And so, right now, phones have replaced our sense of direction, which I'm totally cool with. I'm perfectly happy to outsource my sense of direction to Google because it's efficient and there's benefits. But there are certain points when we start to give up things that we might not ever be able to get back. And so we're in the process of this merger, where Sergey Brin, the founder of Google, talks about the day in which Google will be implanted in our brains. Human-machine interface is the thing that Silicon Valley is investing a lot of money in right now. Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are spending money on it. And it's this idea that there'll be a technology that will allow them to read our brainwaves, which sounds pretty outlandish to me. But then again, if you told me 15 years ago that I would be able to access every television show known to humanity on a device that I keep on my pocket, I would have laughed at that as well. And so once we cross certain thresholds, once we destroy certain institutions, once we give up certain values like privacy, once we surrender certain ideas about humanness, there's no going back. And that's why I think that these questions are so essential, and I'm so grateful that you're having a conversation about them. Now, at the core of these products and these companies are algorithms. They are feedback loops that create the sort of addictive behavior that I described to you at the beginning of my talk. And how do these feedback loops work? Well, they take our data. What is our data? Data is everywhere we've traveled on the internet. It's every question that we've entered into Google. With Facebook, it's every post that we begin to write and we delete, because everything is saved on the internet. Their pack rat servers, because of the low cost of computing, are able to save every shard of information, not knowing whether it's going to be useful now or useful 10 years from now. But they become these dossiers that they create that I said are these x-rays of our souls, these intimate portraits of the inside of our mind. Now, if you take a company like Facebook, they take that information and then they use it in order to organize the information that appears in the news feed. Because Facebook, contrary to appearances, is not just your friends sharing information with you. It's not just sharing photos. That information is organized by Facebook with the intent of keeping you engaged on their site for as long as possible. And so how does that work? So when it comes to the realm of politics, they know, for instance, the things that will that cause you to become excited. They know the things that stoke your emotions. They know the things that cause you terror. They know the things that cause you pleasure. And it's it's an incredible power that they have when it comes to providing that sense of hierarchy to information. And the fact is that we've all, this is not, it's not magical powers that they've possessed, because we've all acquiesced in one way, shape, or form to the presence of these companies in our lives. They do deliver incredible efficiencies, and I don't want to posture as a total Luddite, even though there's a little bit of me that's Luddite, because Google search engine is one of the incredible marvels of human engineering. I mean, you have to bow down before the iPhone for all of the efficiencies and all the pleasures that it provides. But as these companies have grown, we've all become extremely dependent on these companies and platforms one way, shape, or form or another. And I could give you a small autobiographical window into that, which is that, as Macon mentioned, I was the editor of the New Republic magazine for 7 years. And all of journalism, in one way or another, has grown incredibly dependent on Facebook for revenue. But at the New Republic, we happen to have our own very peculiar reasons for becoming dependent on Facebook, which was that the magazine had been bought by Mark Zuckerberg's roommate from college, a guy called Chris Hughes. And Chris, when he bought the magazine, was an exhilarating figure. He was young. He had intellectual curiosity. He had $700 million in the bank. Yeah, you hate him already. And so he was the most idealistic owner that you could hope for. And he wanted to apply his fortune and the legacy brand of the New Republic to try to find a dignified way from journalism to escape the difficulties of its transitions into the new digital world. And so when Chris came, we had, for the first 2 years, a very, very exciting time trying to figure out how we could take this small elitist institution that was the New Republic and extend it. And we created a website that was almost an anti-website, because one of the primary values of Facebook and of most websites is just kind of that they're infinity pools, that they just kind of you could scroll forever. The idea is that you have this smorgasbord of information, and if you don't like the first thing, you'll be able to click on the third or 100th thing. And so we decided that we were going to create a website that would almost be an anti-website that would have a sense of finitude and hierarchy, and you'd know that there was a cover story, and we would say, you know what, we're not going to provide you with 150 things. Here are the 4 things that you need to read today. And it was a beautiful idea and a gorgeous website, and from the perspective of traffic, a complete flop. And so for 2 years, we produced great journalism. I was very proud of the work that we did, but we weren't making any money. And so the day inevitably came where Chris said, you know, we need to really start to turn around our revenue. But he didn't like advertising, especially, or selling advertising. And so there was one way that you know how to instantaneously turn around your fortunes on the web, which is to try to glom on to a platform like Facebook. And since he had good claims to have invented social media, he really seemed to know the tricks that would be able to make that happen. And so we installed a data guru on site, and this magazine, which was invented to be an enemy of conventional wisdom, that prided itself on its contrarianism, suddenly had to operate in the Facebook universe. And the logic of the Facebook universe is one in which you're trying to reach the widest possible audience. The key term on Facebook, and really the key term in our media age, is trending. That there's a science to exploiting data, to operating in this universe that I described to you, where Facebook is trying to play with your emotions constantly in order to keep you as engaged for as long as possible. And so we went from being contrarian to trying to latch onto the thing that was at the trailhead of its ascent to popularity. And I can give you one example of the sort of thing that you would have to produce to do that. There was a lion, a celebrity lion, if you will, the Kim Kardashian of lions, who was killed by a hunter from Minnesota, and he was called Cecil the lion. And Cecil the lion was killed, and the hunter posted a photo on Facebook, and suddenly the internet was up, Facebook especially, was up in arms about this. And it was a horrible thing. I think we could all stipulate that one should not kill endangered species and gloat about it. But every organization looked at the data, they could see the performance on Facebook, and they tried to scrape some of the popularity. And so every publication, no matter if it was the Washington Post or the New Yorker or the Atlantic or the National Enquirer, was trying to produce the piece of content that would take off on Facebook by glomming onto the popularity of the Cecil the Lion story. And at the end of the day, there were 3.2 million stories written about the death of Cecil the Lion. And that's the problem, is that journalism has outsourced its values to the platforms. And we can see all the ways in which the dominance of the platforms have started to damage the health of our public square. One way I think that we've all become increasingly familiar with this is the notion of filter bubbles. That when your information is being arrayed in a way to keep you engaged as long as possible, when it's being tailored to suit your politics, you end up suffering from confirmation bias. You're fed information that you want to hear, because that's what Facebook makes money off of. And so if you're a liberal, you end up getting liberal content all day long. If you're a conservative, you get conservative content all day long. And it weakens our intellectual immune system. We become highly susceptible to demagoguery, to fake news, and to other people. I've described to you the way in which good actors like journalists are able to exploit the Facebook system. We know for a fact that the world is filled with bad actors who are incredibly adept at exploiting the Facebook system. We've seen the way, well, I could actually just tell you, and it also, this dependence changes the values of the people who produce content. At the New Republic, we were a magazine that prided ourselves on our centrism, on our contrarianism, and because we saw that in a Facebook world, traffic came from preaching to your choir. It dragged us to the left because that's what our business model demanded of us. We've seen the way, and just one further thing, it's really astounding how these filter bubbles, of course, reflect trends in human existence in the real world, and the ways in which we all sort ourselves out politically based on our sort ourselves out in terms of where we live residentially based on our politics. But it's also incredible how few of us have conversations with people we disagree with. 52% of all Americans, according to an NBC poll, have not had a meaningful political conversation over the course of the last 2 years with somebody that they substantively disagreed with. We've seen the way in which it destroys the institutions of the public square because of the advertising monopolies that Google and Facebook have captured. We see how hard it is for institutions that are not Google and Facebook to survive. Just this week, the New York Daily News cut half of its staff. Local journalism around the country is suffering. There's a vast percentage of our repertorial population that has been put out to pasture over the course of the last 15 years. We've seen the ways in which these platforms, because they're pandering to us, because they're exploiting us, encourage the sort of triviality that the Cecil the Lion story illustrates. But from the perspective of journalism, for instance, you have no choice but to play along with the Facebook game. So I might not like Facebook and I might not like what it's doing to journalism, but if I'm running a newspaper, if I'm running a website or magazine, I have to play along with the games of Facebook. And this is the problem with this world that we're living in, is that there's just not as much consumer choice as there should be. We see this with, if I wanted an alternative to Facebook that did a better job of protecting my privacy, I don't really have that alternative. There should be a world in which Google is having a robust competition against other search engines trying to prove that they do a better job of protecting my privacy. But we haven't really been able to give the space to those potential competitors. And the platforms become self-fulfilling and self-sustaining, and we can see that in the way in which a company like Amazon is able to use its own algorithms to reinforce its own powers. That Amazon is both the platform and it is a competitor on its own platform. And so we see the ways in which when it sees that an item is trending and is becoming profitable, it jumps into that market, it begins manufacturing that item itself. And so it's both the marketplace and it's a competitor in its own marketplace. And I'd argue the same thing is actually true for Facebook. Facebook is both a platform for media, but it's a media company itself. It's competing against media for advertising and for eyeballs and for your attention. And so, it's tempting to look at something like Facebook's stock price today and to say, this problem will just take care of itself. That eventually consumers are going to end up revolting against these companies when they see the truth about them, and the market's going to come to punish their dominance, and we'll move on. But I don't think that's actually what's happening with Facebook. I think that what's happening with Facebook is actually testament to its power, which is that Facebook now has 2 billion users, and it's running out of new eyeballs because it's captured us all already. And so it's not that their growth has reversed itself in the face of the hearings and the scandals. It's just that their growth is not quite up to market's expectations. So when Mark Zuckerberg went before Congress, Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, asked him a question. And he said, "You're a monopoly, aren't you?" And Zuckerberg kind of hemmed and hawed. And he said, "The day is coming when you're going to be regulated." And Zuckerberg said, "You know what? You're right. The day is coming when we're going to be regulated. The internet needs to be regulated." And Lindsey Graham said, "Well, thank you very much. Could you submit us a copy of regulations that you'd like to see?" And to me, that's the danger, one of the dangers of this moment politically, is that regulation is on its way. And some of that stuff that, from my perspective, I think that we need and we want to see, there should be some baseline of privacy protection. It's gobsmacking that the United States does not have a comprehensive law protecting data. But there's another danger, which is that we start heaping power onto these companies through the process of regulation, where we say, "You know what? Hey guys, could you do a better job protecting against sex traffickers?" And they say, "Yeah, sure, we'll do that." hey guys, can you do a better job protecting against foreign adversaries who are trying to buy ads on your system? Okay, sure, we'll do a better job with that. And then the powers that we give them increase, and we get something that's much closer to the AT&T model of regulated monopoly, where we end up brokering a truce with these companies, where we say, in exchange for keeping your monopolies, you're going to have to behave in the service of the common good. Now that might have worked for a while with AT&T, but because we're dealing with companies that exist in the public sphere, because they are dealing with companies that traffic in speech, because they're companies that traffic in private data, I think the dangers of that sort of truce between the state and the monopoly is far more dangerous. And when we see this in China with its social trust index and the ways in which the Chinese have exploited social media as what they call engines of social manipulation, where they use your social media to judge your qualifications for credit, for citizenship, for travel documents, where if you share state media, your score goes up, but if you share information from a human rights lawyer, your credit score goes down. I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to see the way in which governments could very easily exploit these systems, which prey on our weaknesses. And so I think that's the reason why I say that antitrust is really the best tools that we have when it comes to dealing with the powers of these companies. The solution to their power should not be to give them more power. The solution should be to find ways to create pluralism in our public sphere, to create diversity, to create competition. That we need to, if we're ever going to be able to escape filter bubbles, there needs to be a rich world of alternatives. And antitrust has this tendency to look backwards, to act when it sees abuses in the past. And because of that, it lets things slide. But I think that if antitrust is going to be an important tool to guiding us through this thicket, if it's going to be a tool to helping us preserve the public square, it's going to have vision. It's going to need to take some risks when it comes to thinking about the role of government and the role of monopoly. There's this other tendency within antitrust towards passivity, that we say we got to let markets take their course, that there's no way that we can anticipate the next kid turning up in their garage to produce the innovation that's going to disrupt these guys. And over the long run, I mean, of course, that's a possibility, but we can't count on it. And there's the American tradition of dealing with monopoly is of creating space for the next thing. And that's especially true in the realm of communications. That the post office was the first American communications monopoly, but we didn't allow the telegraph business to reside within the post office. We created space and we created opportunities for private players to emerge in the telegraph business and to connect the country. And when a monopoly did emerge in the telegraph business, we threatened to nationalize it. Ulysses S. Grant threatened to nationalize Western Union and move it back into the telegraph business, and that threat was important to constraining the power of Western Union and creating space for a telephone company to emerge independent of Western Union. And when AT&T captured its monopoly in telephony, we didn't let it extend into the radio business. And then we broke NBC radio into NBC and ABC. And the Nixon administration encouraged the creation of the cable business, so on down through the history until we get to the Microsoft case, which for my money is one of the most underrated pieces of American political economy. And that I think that there's a growing recognition that it was the Microsoft case that helped create the space for Google to emerge. I mean, it's funny when you talk to people at Google, they're pretty open about this. They're pretty open about the fact that Microsoft, through the browser, had the potential to strangle Google in its crib. But because of the fear of this office, they didn't do that. And we provided space for the next thing and for the next competitor. But over the course of the creation of this phase of the internet, we've lost our nerve. And we haven't applied our tradition, we haven't applied our principles. And so I know it's not going to be easy for you guys when it comes to figuring this all out. The theory is in flux. The questions are not entirely clear, but the stakes really couldn't be much higher. Like I said, the future of our species is at stake, and not just our public sphere, not just our democracy. And we're going to have to try to preserve flickers of humanness as we go through. And we're protecting contemplation. We're protecting we're protecting privacy. We're protecting the integrity of thought. And so when I was upstairs waiting for you, Macon, I saw the wall of photos outside your office. And it's an incredible thing to look at, to see the full history of American antitrust on display, to see the great ones and the not so great ones there staring down on you. But the thing is that it really does, at least from the perspective of this non-lawyer, non-economist, give me both pride in an American tradition, but also a sense of real hope that we don't just have the tools in our toolboxes, but there's a real American spirit that propels us to take on these big essential questions. Thank you very much.
Before our colleague Renee gets up, I just wanted to mention one thing that, I do agree 100% that the Microsoft case is probably one of the most underwritten. And I am proud that two of the absolute warriors in that case, Patty Brink, who's still with the division, and Renata Hesse, are both here, who helped Doug Melamed and Joel Klein against a lot of pressure, not only from the executive branch and the administration, at least reportedly, but also from Capitol Hill and the powers that some of those companies who were subject to that were. But they brought the case, and who knows? But I'm one who is convinced that I don't think either Google or the cell phone and Apple and the Android, for good or bad, would have been here but for that case, let alone all the other innovation that went about through the internet. So again, thank you, Frank, for those provocative thoughts. This is not the traditional type of discussion that us boring antitrust lawyers and economists are used to hearing at our famed ABA meetings and GCR conferences and whatever they are. But this is the type of thing that I hope helps us think about it and then put it through our prisms of economic models and more importantly, legal precedents, which is why we continue to fight the good fight in some of these important cases to make sure we have the legal tools to be able to do that and protect the free markets. And whether you come from the world of Galbraith and thinks antitrust is for the weak of the mind, or you come from the Ayn Rand and believe the Atlas should be shrugged, that's a great book that, that I think helps us all think about it. So thank you again. Let us give Frank another round of applause to thank him for coming. Amen.
Thank you once again, Frank, for those incredibly thought-provoking and fascinating remarks. With that, we're concluding the events here in the Great Hall, and we invite all of you to the Antitrust Division's main conference room in 3109 upstairs for a reception. Thank you.